They moved fast. Too fast. Two blacked-out Land Rovers cut through the narrow streets of western Baghdad. Engines low, headlights off. It was 2:17. The air still held the heat of the day, 32 degrees, even at night. Sweat pooled under body armor. No one spoke. Inside, a troop from the SAS watched the infrared feed flicker across a ruggedized laptop. A courier had been tracked to this block. Signals intelligence had confirmed it. Task Force Orange had followed his handset for 6 hours as it moved between safe houses, never stopping long enough to hit. Tonight, it stopped. That was enough. The order came down from the Joint Operations Room, green light. The request had already passed through the British chain. From the on-ground troop commander to the task force black duty officer. Cleared in under 4 minutes. Someone higher up wanted this done quickly. They always did. The vehicles halted 20 meters short of the target compound. No lights. No noise. Doors opened in sequence. Boots hit asphalt. A 4-man entry team moved first. Suppressed carbines. Night vision down. A 5th man stayed back with the GPMG, covering the alley. The door was thinner than expected. That mattered. The breach was immediate. Controlled charge. Flash. Entry. Then confusion. No resistance. No movement. No weapons. Just a single room. Empty. The laptop feed updated again. The signal gone. Not degraded. Not jammed. Gone. The operator at the back checked the frequency spread again. Nothing. The handset had disappeared mid-operation, as if it had never been there. Outside, a dog started barking. Then another. The troop commander checked his watch. 40 seconds inside. Already too long. They pulled out. By the time the vehicles were moving again, the first call came in from Overwatch. A secondary signal spike. 800 meters south. Same network signature. Same courier pattern. They hadn't missed him. They had been shown something. And somewhere above them, in an air-conditioned operations center filled with screens and satellite feeds, analysts began to redraw the map again. Lines. Nodes. Connections. It looked precise. It looked controlled. It wasn't. They had drones. They had intercepts. They had the best units the United Kingdom could deploy. SAS, SBS, integrated under Task Force Black, working alongside American JSOC elements. They had everything. And they were chasing shadows. They had already run the pattern dozens of times. Signals intelligence would light up. First, a handset, briefly active, passing through known relay nodes tied to insurgent facilitators. Task Force Orange would isolate the number, cross-reference it against existing capture data, then push it to the joint targeting cell. From there, the machine took over. The Americans moved fast. JSOC had built its reputation on speed, find, fix, finish. Delta Force assault squadrons staged on constant standby. Predator drones orbiting overhead, feeding full-motion video into a command center that never slept. Every signal became a potential target. Every target became a mission. And in the early months, it worked. Raids stacked on raids. Doors kicked in across Baghdad, Fallujah, Ramadi. High-value individuals were pulled out of safe houses before dawn. Hard drives seized. Documents bagged. Interrogations followed within hours. The cycle fed itself. Each capture generated more data. More names. More numbers. More locations. It looked like progress. Task Force Black integrated into that system, but they didn't control it. The British SAS and SBS squadrons operated alongside JSOC, but the tempo was set elsewhere. The pressure came from above, from coalition command structures that demanded measurable results. Body counts, detentions, action, and so they moved faster. Too fast. The problem wasn't capability. The SAS had spent decades refining urban counter-terror operations. Northern Ireland had taught them patience. Surveillance. Human networks built over years, not hours. The SBS brought similar discipline for maritime and covert infiltration roles. They understood how insurgent systems adapted, how they disappeared. But in Iraq, that experience collided with a different doctrine. Speed over depth. The first signs of friction were subtle. A target would be identified through intercepted communications. The signal would bounce between cell towers, triangulated within a margin of 50 meters. Good enough for a strike. A troop would deploy, often within the same night. Chinooks or ground vehicles, depending on proximity. Quick insertion, immediate breach, and sometimes they would hit. But often, they didn't. The rooms were empty, still warm. Tea glasses on the floor. A mattress rolled in the corner. Evidence of presence, but never the person. They adjusted. They hit faster. JSOC shortened the kill chain. Less validation. Fewer cross-checks. If the signal matched a known pattern, it was enough. The assumption was simple. Insurgents communicated through these devices. Track the device, find the man. It was clean, logical, and wrong. The insurgent networks were not static. They didn't rely on persistent communication. They adapted to pressure in real time. Couriers carried phones they didn't own. SIM cards rotated every few hours. Messages passed through layers of intermediaries, each one disposable. The handset was never the target, but the system treated it like it was. Raids increased in frequency. 3, 4, sometimes 6 operations per night. Troops rotated through compounds with mechanical precision. Breach, clear, detain, extract. Repeat. Fatigue set in. Not just physical, cognitive. Operators began to notice the patterns, even if they didn't articulate them. The same types of locations. The same absence of resistance. The same feeling of arriving seconds too late. They were moving at speed, but always behind. In one operation near Sadr City, a joint SAS and Delta Force element executed a dual-target raid based on simultaneous signal intercepts. 2 buildings, separated by less than a kilometer. The plan was synchronized entry. Both targets hit within a 30-second window to prevent warning. The first team breached on time. Empty. The second team delayed by 45 seconds due to a blocked access route, an abandoned vehicle in the alley. By the time they entered, the target had already moved. Witnesses later reported a man leaving through a rear exit less than a minute before the breach. 45 seconds. That was the margin. Back in the operations center, analysts marked it as near success. The network had been pressured. Movement had been detected. The system was working. On the ground, it felt different. The SAS troop commanders began pushing back. Requests for more surveillance time. Longer observation windows before action. They wanted confirmation beyond signals. Pattern of life analysis. Human sources. Visual identification. Sometimes they got it. Often, they didn't. Because speed had become the metric. Every delay required justification. Every request for patience moved up the chain, through Task Force Black Command, into the broader coalition structure. Approval meant risk. Risk of losing the target. Risk of inaction. And in that environment, inaction was failure. So the raids continued. Night after night, the Americans refined their technical capabilities. Better intercept platforms. More persistent drone coverage. Data flowed faster than ever. The picture became sharper, more detailed. And yet, the outcomes didn't change. Targets slipped through gaps measured in seconds. Networks regenerated faster than they were dismantled. For every individual detained, 2 more emerged to replace them. The system responded the only way it knew how. Increased pressure. More raids. Shorter cycles. Broader targeting criteria. At one point, the operational tempo reached a level where multiple assault teams were deconflicted across the same district within overlapping time frames. Airspace crowded with UAVs. Communications channels saturated. Command nodes juggling simultaneous operations with incomplete information. It looked like control. It wasn't. Because beneath the surface, the insurgents had already adjusted. They anticipated the speed. They exploited it. Signals were left active just long enough to trigger interest. Phones handed off minutes before a strike. Locations seeded with just enough activity to appear valid. Real targets moved through quieter channels. Human couriers, face-to-face meetings, routes that never touched the digital network. They turned visibility into a weapon. And the more the system relied on that visibility, the more predictable it became. Task Force Black began to see it clearly. Not in a single moment, but in accumulation. Missed targets. Repeated patterns. Operations that felt precise, but achieved nothing. The sense that they were being guided, not hunting. They had everything. Drones overhead. Intercepts in real time. The best trained units in the field. They still couldn't catch the people who mattered. Because they weren't chasing people anymore. They were chasing signals. The system believed it was accelerating toward control. In reality, it was accelerating away from understanding. The assumption sat at the center of everything. Quiet. Unchallenged. Reinforced by data that appeared precise. Track the signal. Find the man. It was clean. Efficient. Scalable. It was also fundamentally flawed. The problem was not the lack of intelligence. The problem was the type of intelligence. Signals intelligence, SIGINT, had become the dominant lens. Task Force Orange intercepted calls, mapped frequency usage, traced handset movement across cell towers with increasing accuracy. Every device became a node. Every node a potential link in a network. From above, it looked like structure. Lines connecting points. Patterns emerging from noise. Networks visualized in clean, geometric clarity. But those lines were assumptions, not confirmations. A handset appearing in 3 locations over 6 hours did not mean a single individual moving through the city. It could mean 3 different couriers, each carrying the same device for a fraction of the route. Or a dead drop, phone left in one location, collected in another. Or deliberate misdirection. The system treated continuity as identity. The insurgents treated identity as disposable. That difference was everything. Task Force Black began to dissect the outcomes, not the inputs. SAS troop commanders reviewed mission logs against real-world effects. Not how precise the intercept was. Not how fast the assault team moved. What actually happened when they arrived. Again and again, the pattern held. Accurate signal. Incorrect target. They were hitting locations that had meaning, but not importance. Facilitators. Safe houses. Transit points. Never the decision makers. Never the architects of the network. Because those individuals understood the system better than the system understood them. They didn't carry phones. Or if they did, they never carried them long enough to matter. The real communication happened elsewhere. Face-to-face meetings in crowded markets where surveillance drones couldn't isolate individuals. Messages passed through family networks, through mosques, through social structures that didn't generate electronic signatures. Information moved at human speed, not digital speed. Invisible to the sensors. The problem was not that the coalition lacked visibility. It was that they trusted the wrong visibility. And once that trust was embedded, everything else aligned around it. Operational tempo increased because signals could be processed quickly. Targets were validated because they fit known patterns. Raids were approved because the data supported them. The machine fed itself. No one stopped to ask whether the data reflected reality. Because it looked like it did. Task Force Black saw the cracks where others saw progress. They noticed that the same networks reappeared days after being disrupted. The same names surfaced in different contexts. The same facilitators replaced within hours of capture. It wasn't resilience. It was redundancy. The insurgent system had been built with loss in mind. Every node expendable. Every connection temporary. Remove one, and the structure adjusted without hesitation. The coalition system was the opposite. Centralized. Data-driven. Dependent on continuity. It needed stable patterns to function. The insurgents denied it those patterns, and then gave it false ones instead. There was another assumption. Less visible. More dangerous. Speed equals pressure. Pressure equals success. SOC's doctrine relied on relentless operational tempo. Hit fast. Hit often. Deny the enemy time to think, to adapt, to reorganize. But the insurgents were not reacting in real time. They were anticipating. Every raid followed a recognizable sequence. Signal detection. Rapid deployment. Night breach. Extraction before dawn. It was efficient. Repeatable. Predictable. And predictability, in that environment, was a vulnerability. Insurgent networks began to shape their behavior around it. Not avoiding detection entirely, but controlling when and where detection occurred. Signals activated in locations they were willing to lose. Movements timed to draw attention away from real activity. They didn't need to hide from the system. They needed to guide it. And the system followed. Task Force Black operators started to feel it during missions. A hesitation that couldn't be explained by terrain or resistance. A sense that the target had already moved, not by chance, but by design. They were arriving on time, but at the wrong moment. Because the timeline itself was being manipulated. Even the chain of command reinforced the illusion. Requests for deeper surveillance moved upward, from troop commanders to squadron leadership, into Task Force Black headquarters. From there, coordination with American JSOC elements required alignment with broader operational priorities. Time became a resource, and it was always in short supply. Every additional hour of observation risked losing the signal entirely. Every delay had to be justified against the possibility of immediate action. So the system defaulted to what it could measure. Speed, not understanding. The problem was not that they were too aggressive. The problem was that they were aggressive in the wrong direction. They were optimizing for the capture of signals, not the disruption of networks. And those are not the same thing. The realization didn't come as a single revelation. It emerged slowly, reluctantly, from patterns that refused to change, from targets that never appeared, from operations that felt precise but achieved nothing. They had built a machine designed to chase what was visible, and the enemy had made visibility meaningless. The problem was not the enemy's ability to hide. The problem was the system's inability to see anything else. They didn't announce the change. There was no directive, no formal shift in doctrine pushed down through coalition command, no briefing that declared the system flawed. It started lower, at troop level, inside the vehicles, in the quiet conversations after another empty compound. The SAS had seen this before. Not Iraq, not this scale, but the pattern was familiar. Northern Ireland had not been a war of signals. It had been a war of people, faces remembered, habits tracked over weeks, informants cultivated slowly, sometimes over years. You didn't find a network by chasing its noise. You found it by understanding its silence. Task Force Black began to lean into that instinct, not by rejecting the system, but by stepping around it. They still received SIGINT, still participated in joint targeting cycles with JSOC, still deployed alongside Delta Force and other American elements when required. The structure remained intact, but inside that structure, they started to operate differently. Slower, deliberately slower. An SAS squadron operating out of Baghdad shifted its internal timeline. Instead of launching within hours of a signal intercept, they held, not indefinitely, just long enough to watch. A single compound might be observed for 12 hours, sometimes 24. Rotating surveillance teams positioned in adjacent buildings. Civilian vehicles parked along approach routes. Operators in local dress blending into early morning foot traffic. No drones overhead. Too visible. Instead, they relied on line of sight. Optics. Patience. They tracked who entered, who left, at what times, in what combinations. Not just movement, but behavior. Who knocked, who didn't, who waited outside before being allowed in. Patterns began to emerge. Not digital patterns, human ones. A man who arrived every evening, never staying more than 10 minutes. Another who only appeared after midnight, always carrying something under his arm. A third who never entered at all, just passed by, slow enough to observe, fast enough to avoid attention. None of them carried active devices. They wouldn't appear on any intercept, but they mattered. The SBS contributed differently. Their experience in covert insertion and surveillance, built through maritime operations and years in places like Helmand, translated into urban concealment. They established static observation posts that could remain undetected for days. Minimal movement, strict discipline, no emissions. They watched, without being seen. And slowly, the picture changed. The network was no longer a series of nodes on a screen. It became a living system. Messy, inconsistent, human. Task Force Black's intelligence cell began to rebuild targeting from the ground up. Human intelligence, HUMINT, took priority. Local sources were reevaluated, not for volume of information, but for reliability. Relationships were cultivated quietly, without immediate operational demands. Information was allowed to mature. That was the difference. Instead of reacting to data, they let it develop context. Chain of command friction increased. Requests for delayed action didn't always align with SOC's tempo. American counterparts pushed for immediate exploitation of signals. Windows of opportunity, they argued, were closing by the minute. They weren't wrong, but they were looking at the wrong window. Task Force Black commanders, operating under UK Special Forces command structures, began to exercise more control over when their units deployed. Coordination remained, but compliance became selective. Missions that relied purely on transient signals were deprioritized. Not rejected, just delayed. Long enough to see if the signal meant anything. Sometimes it didn't. And that absence became valuable. Because a signal that led nowhere wasn't useless. It was a marker, a piece of misdirection, evidence of how the network tried to manipulate visibility. They started mapping that too. Not just where signals appeared, but where they failed to produce results. Negative space. Over time, a different kind of network emerged. One not defined by activity, but by consistency. Individuals who appeared across multiple observations without ever triggering electronic detection. Locations that remained relevant even when signals shifted elsewhere. These were not obvious targets. They were stable ones. And stability, in that environment, was rare. The new approach required restraint. Operators had to watch targets they could easily hit and not act. To let a courier walk away. To ignore a meeting that could have been disrupted. To accept short-term loss for long-term clarity. That wasn't easy, because the system still measured success in immediate results. Detentions, seizures, kills. Patients didn't show up on reports, but its effects did. Gradually, a courier identified through human observation was followed, not for minutes, but for days. His route extended beyond the initial safe house, into other districts, through layers of the network that had never appeared on any intercept. When he was finally taken, it wasn't just a single node removed. It was a pathway exposed. Interrogations changed too. Instead of extracting names to feed back into the same rapid cycle, information was cross-referenced against ongoing surveillance, verified before action, integrated into a broader understanding of how the network functioned, not just who was in it. The tempo slowed, but the impact deepened. Task Force Black wasn't hitting more targets. They were hitting the right ones. And when they moved, it was different. Not reactive, not rushed, deliberate. Because now, they weren't chasing signals. They were tracking behavior. And behavior couldn't be switched off mid-operation. It couldn't disappear between cell towers. It required presence, time, exposure. For the first time, the system wasn't being guided. It was observing, quietly, patiently. And the network, built to manipulate speed and visibility, began to face something it hadn't prepared for. Stillness. They chose the wrong night to move. Not because of weather. Not because of visibility. Because, for the first time, someone was already watching before the signal appeared. The observation had started 36 hours earlier. A narrow street in the Adhamiyah district. Dense urban layout. Concrete buildings pressed close together, 3 to 4 stories high. Balconies enclosed with rusted metal grills. Limited vehicle access. Foot traffic constant until well past midnight. An SBS surveillance team had taken position inside a vacant second-floor apartment across from the target building. Entry was made at 3:10 the previous morning. No forced access. The lock had been bypassed cleanly. No trace left behind. Inside, they established a static hide. 2 men. Minimal equipment. Suppressed carbines placed within reach, but out of sight. Primary tools were optics, high-magnification scopes mounted on stabilized rests. A thermal monocular for night transitions. No active emissions. No radios unless necessary. Communication routed through a hardline relay positioned 2 buildings away, installed earlier by a separate support element. They didn't move unless required. They didn't speak unless necessary. Temperature inside the room climbed to 38 degrees by midday. No air conditioning. Windows sealed to avoid silhouette exposure. Sweat soaked through clothing, pooled on the floor beneath them. They stayed. Across the street, the building showed nothing unusual at first. Families moving in and out. Children on the lower level. A small shop operating from the front room. Bread, bottled water, cigarettes. Normal. That was the point. At 1842, the first deviation. A man approached on foot. Mid-30s. No visible weapon. No phone in hand. He paused briefly outside the entrance. Not to knock, but to look up. 3rd floor window. Less than 2 seconds. Then he entered. He stayed inside for 11 minutes. When he left, he carried nothing. But his behavior had changed. On entry, relaxed. On exit, controlled. Measured steps. Head slightly lowered. Not fear. Awareness. The SBS team logged the time. The duration. The posture shift. No action taken. At 22:17, a second individual. Younger. Early 20s. Entered without hesitation. No pause outside. Stayed for 4 minutes. Left quickly, almost immediately merging into foot traffic. Again, no device. No signal. Invisible to anything except direct observation. By 1 o'clock, the pattern was clear. This was not a residence. It was a node. Not defined by electronics. Defined by behavior. Task Force Black Command was notified through secure relay. The information didn't trigger an immediate assault request. It triggered something else. Continuation. The order came down. Maintain observation. That decision didn't pass easily. Inside the Joint Operations Framework, any identified node, especially one showing repeated traffic, was a candidate for immediate action. JSOC liaison officers flagged the location for potential strike. Predator coverage was requested. Denied. Too visible. Instead, the SAS squadron commander attached to Task Force Black pushed for extended pattern development. The request moved up the British chain, through the on-ground command element, into UK Special Forces headquarters liaison embedded within the coalition structure. Approved, but with conditions. No action without multi-source confirmation. No compromise of ongoing surveillance. And if a high-value individual was confirmed, the window for action would be narrow. Time, again, became the constraint. By the second day, the network began to reveal itself. A courier arrived at 9:13. Different from the previous night. Older. Slower movement. He entered carrying a plastic bag, contents unclear. Stayed for 7 minutes. On exit, the bag was gone. Transfer point. At 14:26, no movement at all. The building went quiet. Too quiet. The shop remained closed. No children. No residents. Entering or leaving. Deliberate pause. The SBS team didn't shift. Didn't adjust. They waited. At 16:02, a vehicle approached. White Opel sedan. Civilian. No distinguishing marks. It stopped briefly, engine running. No one exited. After 12 seconds, it moved on. But in that window, a figure appeared at the third-floor window. Brief. Less than a second. Confirmation. Someone inside was monitoring the street. Not reacting. Controlling. That changed the assessment. This wasn't just a transit point. It was a coordination node. The kind that didn't appear on any intercept. By 1940, the decision point arrived. A new individual approached. Different posture. Confident. No hesitation. He didn't look up at the building. Didn't scan the street. He walked directly to the entrance and entered without pause. Time inside, 23 minutes. Longer than any previous visitor. Inside the hide, the SBS team adjusted slightly. Optics tightened. Thermal confirmed multiple heat signatures on the third floor, more than before. At least 4 individuals. The pattern had shifted. Task Force Black Command received the update in real time. This time, the response was immediate, but not rushed. An SAS assault troop, already on standby 6 kilometers away, was activated. Not deployed yet. Activated. The troop commander received the briefing en route to a holding position. No signals intercept. No drone feed. Just human observation. Entry point. Third floor. Estimated 4 to 6 occupants. Unknown armament. No time pressure from a fading signal. Only from the possibility of movement. The vehicles stopped short of the target area. 150 meters out. Engines cut. The team dismounted. 8 operators. Split into 2 elements. Primary entry and rear containment. Weapons checked, suppressed carbines, sidearms, flashbangs. 1 GPMG positioned for external cover. Set up at the alley junction with clear line of sight to the building entrance. No aerial overwatch. No real-time updates once they moved. This was different. They approached on foot. Slow. Controlled. Using shadow, not speed. At the entrance, no breach charge. Too loud. Mechanical entry. Lock bypassed in under 5 seconds. Inside, the stairwell was narrow. Concrete. No lighting beyond ambient spill from upper floors. Temperature inside was higher. Trapped heat. No airflow. The lead man moved first. Night vision down. Weapon raised. Second and third followed, covering angles. No voices. No movement above. But they knew. The timing was not based on a signal. It was based on behavior. And behavior had a rhythm. At the third floor landing, the team paused. A faint sound from inside the apartment. Not conversation. Movement. Something being placed down. The lead operator signaled. 3, 2, 1. The door opened without force. Unlocked. Inside, the room was active. For men. 1 seated. 2 standing. 1 near the window. For a fraction of a second, both sides saw each other. But only one side understood what was happening. The SAS team moved first. Controlled. Precise. No wasted motion. Targets neutralized in under 4 seconds. No shots fired beyond suppressed bursts. No alarms triggered beyond the room. The man seated at the center wasn't armed. He didn't reach for anything. He looked at them. Not surprised. Measured. As if he had expected something. Just not this. On the floor beside him, no phone. No device. Just paper. Names. Routes. Times. A network. Not mapped by signals. Mapped by people. And for the first time, they had reached the part of it that mattered. The room went quiet before the bodies hit the floor. For seconds of movement. Then stillness. The SAS entry team held their positions, weapons fixed, angles maintained. No one rushed forward. No one spoke. The immediate violence had ended, but the operation hadn't. Because this time, the objective wasn't speed. It was confirmation. The troop commander stepped in last. He didn't look at the bodies first. He looked at the walls, the corners, the floor, the details that didn't move. No secondary exits. No concealed doorways. Windows covered, but not reinforced. This wasn't a defensive position. It was a working space. Clear. Came the low confirmation from the rear element on the stairwell. Only then did the team begin to shift. One operator moved to the man seated at the center. Still alive. No visible wounds. Hands steady, resting on his knees. No attempt to resist. No attempt to flee. He had made his decision before they entered. Flex cuffs applied. Quick search. No weapon. No device. No identification. Nothing that could be tracked. That was consistent. Across the room, another operator secured the papers on the floor. Notebooks. Loose sheets. Handwritten. Arabic script, dense and structured. Names paired with locations. Times aligned with movement windows. Not random. Organized. A network, but not one that existed on any screen inside the Coalition Operations Center. This one had been built to survive. Without electronics. Outside, the GPMG gunner maintained position, covering the alley. No movement. No reaction from neighboring buildings. The suppression had worked. 4 controlled bursts, subsonic rounds, contained within concrete walls. No signature. No escalation. Inside, the clock started. They had minutes before the environment changed. Before someone noticed. Before the network adjusted. The troop commander made the call. Extract the individual. Leave the rest. No site exploitation team. No extended search. No delay. That decision would have been questioned elsewhere. Why leave material behind? Why not collect everything? Because the objective wasn't the room. It was the man. And more importantly, what he connected to. The extraction route had already been planned. Not broadcast over open comms. Not reliant on air assets. A ground vehicle staged 2 streets away, engine cold, driver waiting. The detainee was moved first. Hood applied. Hands secured. Escorted down the stairwell with controlled speed. Not rushed. Not slow. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Slight breeze moving through the alley. The kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But the operators did. Because changes in environment meant changes in behavior. And behavior was now the metric. They loaded him into the vehicle. No lights. Doors closed softly. Engines started only after movement began. By the time the rest of the team exfiltrated on foot to secondary vehicles, the detainee was already moving out of the district. No helicopters. Too visible. Instead, a layered ground movement. Vehicle switch after 3 kilometers. Then another. Routes pre-cleared, but not predictable. No straight lines. Back at the holding facility. Undisclosed location, hardened structure, controlled access. The next phase began. Interrogation. But not the kind the system had relied on before. No immediate pressure for names. No demand for rapid output. Because this time, they already had something more valuable than names. They had context. The detainee was processed by a joint element. SAS intelligence officers working alongside analysts embedded within Task Force Black. Coordination existed with American counterparts, but control of this interrogation remained within the British chain. That mattered, because the objective was different. They weren't trying to expand a list. They were trying to understand a system. The first 12 hours produced almost nothing. The man spoke little. When he did, it was controlled, measured. No obvious deception. No obvious truth. He understood time. He understood that delay was protection. But he also understood something else. The way he had been captured. No signal intercept. No rushed breach. No indication that his movement had triggered the operation. That changed his calculation. Because it meant something had shifted. And he didn't know how far that shift had gone. On the second day, the first cracks appeared. Not in what he said. In what he avoided. Names he refused to mention. Locations he redirected away from. Patterns of silence that aligned too closely with the notes recovered from the room. The analysts didn't push against the silence. They mapped it. Every omission became a marker. Every hesitation a data point. Cross-referenced against ongoing surveillance. Because the operation hadn't ended with the capture. SBS teams were still in place. Watching secondary locations tied to the same behavioral patterns. SAS surveillance elements tracking individuals identified through previous observation. The network was still moving. But now, it was being observed from inside and outside at the same time. And for the first time, the information began to align. A name mentioned in passing matched a figure seen entering a different location 48 hours earlier. A route described vaguely corresponded to a courier path already under observation. A meeting time, initially dismissed as irrelevant, aligned with a pattern of movement across 2 districts. The picture wasn't built from a single source. It was built from convergence. And convergence couldn't be faked. Within 72 hours, Task Force Black authorized a second operation, not based on a signal, not even based on a single piece of intelligence, but on a pattern that held across multiple dimensions: human observation, interrogation behavior, physical movement. The target this time wasn't a node. It was a coordinator, someone who didn't move often, who didn't communicate electronically, who relied on others to carry information, the kind of individual the previous system would never have seen. The operation was smaller, tighter, no external coordination beyond what was necessary. Even within the broader coalition structure, details were limited. Need to know, because visibility, they had learned, was a vulnerability. The SAS team moved again at night. But this time, the timing wasn't dictated by a signal spike. It was dictated by routine. A window, identified through days of observation. A moment when the target would be present, not because of communication, but because of habit. They entered the building without resistance. The man was there. No chase. No delay. He didn't have time to become a signal. He was taken as a person. And when he disappeared from the network, the effect was immediate. Not visible on screens, but visible in behavior. Movement slowed. Meetings reduced. Couriers changed routes. Uncertain. Inconsistent. For the first time, the network wasn't adapting smoothly. It was reacting. Because something fundamental had been disrupted. Not a node. Not a device. A point of coordination. And those are harder to replace. Back in the operations center, the data began to reflect the change. Fewer signals. Less activity. At first glance, it looked like progress. But Task Force Black read it differently. This wasn't suppression. It was confusion. And confusion, in that environment, was more valuable than silence. Because silence could be manufactured. Confusion could not. They hadn't destroyed the network. But they had touched something real. Something the system couldn't generate. And for the first time since the campaign began, the operations weren't chasing what appeared. They were shaping what happened next. The system didn't collapse. It adjusted. Quietly. Without announcement. Across Baghdad, the tempo shifted, but not in the way reports would later describe. There was no sudden drop in violence. No clear line where chaos ended and control began. What changed was harder to measure. The relationship between action and understanding. Before, they had moved first and interpreted later. Signals triggered raids. Raids produced data. Data fed the next cycle. It was fast, efficient, constant, and blind. Now, movement came after recognition. Not recognition of a signal. Recognition of behavior. Task Force Black didn't abandon technology. They still used SIGINT. Still coordinated with JSOC. Still had access to drones, intercept platforms, and the full weight of coalition intelligence. But those tools were no longer the starting point. They became support. Secondary. Because the primary question had changed. Not, where is the signal? But who is actually moving the system? That shift didn't scale easily. It couldn't. Because it depended on time. On observation. On human judgment. Things that couldn't be accelerated without losing their value. And that created friction. Coalition command. Structures still demanded output. Metrics. Numbers that could be briefed, tracked, justified. The language of progress remained the same. Detentions. Kills. Operations conducted per night. Task Force Black produced fewer of them. But the effects spread further. Networks that had previously regenerated within days began to fragment. Not collapse. Not disappear. Fragment. Connections weakened. Coordination slowed. Decisions took longer. Redundancy, once a strength, became a liability when key individuals were removed with precision instead of volume. Because redundancy works when losses are random. It fails when losses are selective. The insurgent networks had been built to absorb pressure. They had not been built to withstand understanding. SAS and SBS elements continued to refine the approach. Surveillance became the center of gravity, not as a precursor to action, but as an operation in itself. Days spent watching a single location. Weeks tracking the same individual through different parts of the city. Patterns layered over time. Not rushed. Not forced. And when action came, it was quiet. Short. Final. No repeated hits on the same empty structures. No chasing of devices that vanished mid-operation. No reliance on signals that could be manipulated. They targeted continuity. The individuals who held the system together. Not because they were visible, but because they were consistent. Those individuals didn't appear often. But when they did, they mattered. The cooperation with American units evolved as well. JSOC elements, Delta Force, DevGru, began to integrate aspects of the approach. Not entirely. Their operational model remained aggressive, fast, designed for scale. But within specific taskings, especially high-value targeting, the emphasis began to shift. More time allocated for pattern-of-life analysis. Greater weight given to human. Less reliance on single-source validation. It wasn't a replacement of doctrine. It was an adjustment. Because results were difficult to ignore. Fewer raids. Better outcomes. That ratio mattered. The broader campaign in Iraq didn't transform overnight. Insurgency is not dismantled through a single method. Political factors, local dynamics, external influences, all continued to shape the environment. But at the operational level, something had changed. A recognition that power, drones, intercepts, elite units, did not equal control. That visibility, signals, data, screens, did not equal understanding. And that speed, when applied, without insight, only made failure arrive faster. Task Force Black didn't win because they were more capable. They had always been capable. They won because they stopped believing what the system showed them and started seeing what it couldn't.